What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. We haven't been uploading so much, but I have been playing. In Season 12, I peaked into top 500 on Tank. Actually been enjoying the patches so far. Season 13 is underway. The patch was not so severe, so things aren't changed too much, but it's been a while since I've done a tier list, so let's get right into it. There wasn't so many tank changes. Mauga gets a bit of a buff on the duration of Incen chain gun, where you'll be a bit better shooting at flyers, especially like far as out in the distance. I think that's a little more effective, but overall Mauga's pretty easy to counter. Not going to change his tier list ranking too much. Ramatra, way worse against Reinhardt, a bit better against Brig perhaps, and okay against Winston. Overall, Ram's not going to change too much because especially where you see where Reinhardt is placed on the tier list, it'll start to make a bit more sense. Ram doesn't change too much, neither does Rein. Overall, the tank patch was kind of a nothing burger. The whole patch in general was pretty tame, which indicates that the devs anyway think that the game is fairly balanced, or at the very least balanced in a reasonable way, that they're not going to try to shake it up too much. However, I am willing to bet going into next season with the new hero, whatever that is, we should expect that to be more transformative, as that's usually when they start to take their bigger swings at change. Now, the tier lists on this channel are always for the average player working your way up to the highest ranks. The highest ranks perform entirely different, especially as someone who's gone through the ranks and plays at different ranks myself. Getting back up into the highest tiers of players, the gameplay is night and day difference from what the average player does. So because of that, there's certain heroes that always stand out as being pretty problematic to play and learn, because, well, if your team doesn't know how to play around them, or if you need way more skill to output on them, they're probably going to be at the like break glass if necessary tier, which is where I'm going to put a couple of these picks. Ball and Roadhog especially. I think Hog's fallen off the face of the planet after the armor changes. It's so much easier to play so many other different types of heroes rather than Hog. Like, if you're really set up to counter something with either of these picks, you can go for it, but they're too easily countered themselves by some of the better picks in the game right now, and so I'm gonna put them on basically avoid unless you are a real good specialist on them. As bad as they are, I think Orisa's even worse. Like, the most trap of a pick ever. I think a lot of players think that she's this really brawly character, but really she's more of like a poke character that has a couple brawl tools to survive, and the things that are actually good at brawling are way better because they either protect their team better or just more reliable. So these are, yeah, avoid probably. Doomfist, slightly more skill expression, so I would change him based on how good you are. I think he's kind of a boom bust character, so his performance is going to go up and down, but I think there's just more outplay potential and peak value that if you commit to Doom, put him in the B tier. And then the last tank that I think you should kind of avoid trying to force is Mauga, where he's got some matchups now where he can shoot at range and he has a really good ultimate, but again, he's pretty easily countered by a lot of things, and so he's a troublesome hero to learn, mainly because they've really tried to make sure that his chain guns don't auto kill tanks, and so because of that, often you got to play in this really strange way to avoid the tank battle against certain tank counters, and your team's just not really going to want to play like that, and it's difficult to like force your will against your counters, whereas other characters can just take more space and make the game easier to play for everybody. Mauga's got the skill expression to potentially outplay that, but I just, again, all of these picks are just more risk than they're worth, whereas the rest of the tanks I feel really play the game well. So let's get into the more serious ones now. A comp that you're often going to play with is poke. So if you look at your team comp and you have picks that don't really enable your tank, pick a poke tank. Learn Queen and Sigma, and these are going to be staples for you because a lot of times you're going to get double hit scan DPS. That's a very popular DPS line, or Alari's really popular, BAP's really popular, Mercy's really popular, and a lot of these picks don't really help the tank fight, and so therefore you kind of just need to learn to anchor, hit your shots, and play your cooldowns as best you can, and not look to go take a brawl fight. So these tanks are really, really good. And whereas some of these other thick boy DPS style tanks fall, Queen wins in a few cases where both she can get a lot of value without trying to tank on the front line, playing cover fishing for hook opportunities or knife opportunities. And then most importantly, I'd say Queen's ult is kind of nuts right now because you're going to face against a lot of Juno, and Juno's ult is her strongest play, in my opinion. And well, if Queen ult antis everybody inside the Juno ult, you have a major contributing fight in Juno's peak point. Her biggest power, you can take that away from her. Also, a lot of these smaller mobility characters have lower HP, so Queen's medium range shotgun can punish them. Queen is very, very good right now, but of course does get stuffed up by the armor tanks somewhat. Like, you can farm them for damage with your axe, but you're not going to expect your shotgun to just blow through them either. So you have to take squishy duels and really play your cooldowns. But if you do, Queen is absolutely nuts as a character. Now remember, I make tier lists for the average tier of player, and I'm telling you, Rein easily beats most things. And the reason is, holds the front line, slows the game down with his shield, and his ult got over buffed. Super, super easy to use Earth Shatter to guarantee kills, and you're just gonna do a lot on the front line without trying very hard. Like, think about these other picks you can go against. Orisa, shooting into your shield, damage reduction onto your armor health. Mauga, they stat changed that. None of these really fight you very well. Even Queen, you run over Sigma. A lot of these picks, Rein just easily wins on the front line, and you've got lots of outplay against the other picks that I'm going to populate into the list as well. While Rein doesn't go up, he does play the game the way a lot of players want to play the game, which is frontline focused. And so because of that, as long as you outplay your counters, use your shield well, and land your damage, but most importantly, survive in order to ult, you're going to really have a lot of easy value compared to the amount of peak output you can get as Rein. It's kind of nuts, honestly, how they've overstated this character. And I keep putting Rein high on the tier list, and players like roll their eyes at me. But if you look at the pick rates and the win rates and the performance, and a lot of games where enemy has a Rein and you don't, your whole team gets rolled over. Trust me, I've seen it at all the different ranks, other than maybe the highest rank, where they can outposition him and know not to put damage into the Rein. Because the worst thing you can do is try to over-invest to kill the Rein, not have the heroes to do so. He gets healed up, his shield regens, and then all of a sudden you're not winning on the front line like you expect to. So if you can't win on the front line, that's where you start to go to these other picks that maybe can just go at squishies better. Populating the rest of the list now into the A tier. These are all playable tanks. They're somewhat good, but to varying degrees. I am going to put Ram slightly above Sig just because he's more flexible. He does lose to Rein harder now, but he's pretty decent against the rest of the cast. Winston is more playable than Queen in a lot of places, so this is how I'd feel about it. If you want to play dive tanks, still go to the mainstays. If you're really good at Doom, you can play that, but Winston is pretty nuts, honestly, overall. There's a lot of picks that he's going to enable, a lot of really guaranteed tanking on the front line, and mainly they buffed Primal Rage. That's what's keeping him nearer the top of the tier list. If you can get your kill output with Primal going and really learn to like disrupt things again, Juno ult, you can knock them out of the Juno ult. That's pretty nuts. A lot of these other picks against Winston are unreliable, and whereas Winston doesn't have the killing stats necessarily to overwhelm high healing numbers, there isn't always as much as you might think. Like, a lot of the mobility heroes have lower health now, so Winston can focus fire them easier, and a character like Juno doesn't have a big healing option, so it's like focus fire really works right now. So just being reliable, having shields for your team to use, and focus fire, super, super good. The tank doesn't necessarily need a lot of damage to inflict a lot of damage right now, just based on how much power you have in your positioning. It's more of a positioning battle when Juno's top of the meta, and I think that's pretty accurate to say. Juno's a top meta pick, so that's going to still influence a lot, even though she did get some nerf tweaks. I think the player base is quite adept, and she's quite popular still, even a season later. So that still dictates a lot of the tank battle, as you really are going to be playing off your backline whenever you're picking your tank. Next up, let's look at the supports. So Batiste shoots lasers now. Very little recoil on his primary fire. Kind of a strange change to that one. Brig gets tuned back a bit, so there's a bit of a delay with Repair Pack, and Juno also gets tuned back a bit. However, all of these changes are quite minor. They're not going to radically change the support hierarchy at all, so I'm not even sure they play much of a factor in my decision making, as the interactions between the different mechanics of the game are much more important than small numbers tweaks here or there. And try to think how they've rebalanced the game as well. Mobility characters have their health lowered, so a lot of brawly characters can kind of run at them and outstat them easily. Poke characters are strong, where appropriate, and that kind of can dominate the game because there's limited defenses against it. Quite a few styles of play are good, and you just sort of have to commit to the map and your team comp in order to really see the most value. But there's a few that still stand out. I am going to say Juno and Brig are still some of the top picks right now. Because if you think about what you're going to go against, you're either going to need to get away from the enemy tank or get yours in or parry back. A lot of supporting is this living over time, not really necessarily needing to make a big play yourself, but instead to look to make a big play in the ult fight. Both of these characters do that in their own way. And in fact, as I look to the rest of the support category, in order for this to make as much sense as possible, I am going to put these two in S tier. Because when I look down to the other end of the spectrum, I want to say a budget version of these same ideas is Lifeweaver, who's just like understated. For a lower ranked player, he's super easy to play, but I just feel like if you commit to learning these, you're going to notice just how much easier it is to also contribute in more ways. Lifeweaver's a heal bot who parries back, and then these two heal bot a bit, but either manipulate your team in the ult fight to reposition them, have a bigger ult yourself, and can take some duels yourself. Lifeweaver can kind of do all of that in a budget way, which puts him a couple tiers down. Otherwise, these poke supports are really, really good right now. It's hard for me to know which one I want to put where, but if you think about it, like there's a bunch of poke tanks or that have kind of brawly, sustainy options. And all three of these in their own way, especially on a new map like Clash, if you play Illari on Clash, kind of insane, right? Like you set up a turret that they can't get to, you're applying insane poke pressure, and importantly, Illari has her own self-boop and reposition tool, which BAP kind of struggles with. Like BAP's stats for healing and the damage is pretty nuts in the ult fight. Zen kind of auto wins the tank fight. All of these are really good, I think. If you get skilled at any of these, you have a really good option in order to take over the game and have fluid gameplay, whereas some of the other picks are much more all-in or situational, and I am going to put both Kiri and Ana in B tier, like because, well, how many things do you really need to cleanse the ante for with Kiri? And ante, you're all in on that play, whereas the other characters either get you out of position, get you in position, and if you don't win the game, basically, by throwing that anti-nade, the other characters are going to have more value over time, apply more pressure, apply more multitasking, apply more flexibility. It's not that these picks can't win the game, it's just like you'll be needing to do a lot more skillful plays, whereas everything above these two, whether Juno, Brig, Illari, Zen, BAP, more multitasking, all the characters above Kiri and Ana on the tier list can kind of change targets more fluidly and apply pressure. Remember, after the health pool changes and the tank changes, slowing things down, the support line kind of just needs to turret up, right? Like you don't want to be all in on a Kiri flank or all in on your Ana abilities landing. Either or, I don't think that's very good. It's better to either go in and out with the fight or to apply big amounts of pressure from a turret. Either one is a bit stronger in my opinion. Now, Moira's a bit tricky to play because on one hand, she's super easy. On the other hand, a lot of these other supports are going to outstat her. So if your tank is getting outplayed by the Brig, or if they have the turret healers, Moira, her biggest tool is focus fire with damage orb. So if there's a flanking playstyle going on and you're going to sync up with the dive, Moira can be extremely lethal and a lot easier to play than these two. So the reposition, changing decisions, that gameplay, Moira is better than Kiri and Ana right now, but understated and compared to the rest, but more flexible as well. The most mobility and really forgiving. So Moira's going to be top of the list there. Lucio's kind of unnecessary right now because having a big sound barrier that lasts a few seconds isn't going to outvalue the two ults above with Rally and Juno ult especially. Like Juno ult's gonna blast through a sound barrier. So having a pretty weak ult, not good right now. A major benefit Lucio has over Juno is his headshot damage. So if you're really skilled with the sonic amplifier, you can do some work with it. But I'm going to say just avoid, honestly. Avoid Lucio. We're going to put him down here. Just learn Juno instead. Mercy falls at the top A tier as well. Similar to Moira, like more of a budget version of other things. Just going to help you in the poke phase. Certain poke characters can be really good. Weak tank interactions as always, but those are probably more dominated by the other picks anyway. Mercy's just fine in my opinion. Now there's a few damage changes in the patch notes. These actually do matter. Hanzo's health goes back up to 250 finally. Sojourn gets a massive series of buffs, okay? Is going to gain energy from the disruption shot, the nade, and it deals more damage. That's nuts, okay? Super huge buff to Sojourn, who's already been getting progressively more buffed over time. Sombra, massive rework. No infinite stealth anymore. Instead, it's tied to Translocator, which is on a 7-second cooldown, and your stealth only lasts 5. I think I've kind of figured out how you're going to have to play this new version of Sombra, but overall, in my opinion, these stats put her in the gutter. So we're going to start off by ranking Sombra right away. I think Sombra's really, really bad, okay? Every other flanker, every other damage dealer feels like they're going to be more consistent and more worthwhile, mainly because you don't have a way to stay in the fight very well. Her stats are better in a couple ways, but if you have to be the type of character that goes in more often or kind of anchors in front of your team, there's just better picks that are going to do that. So if Sombra can't really flank shenanigans the way she used to, you're kind of just picking her to disable the tank over and over again, farm for EMP. Note EMP did get buffed in this series of changes because Hack applies more damage now, so for Sombra anyway. So her shooting her EMP targets is more effective. So in some ways she's a little bit better, but overall her playstyle is just kind of null and void in my opinion. Other characters that can flank right now are significantly better. Tracer, top of the list as always. Because there's Juno in the game, Tracer can hunt down Juno, play in and out of that type of combat that needs to full engage together with a Winston or something. Tracer is nuts. But if you can't learn Tracer, I think Venture is way, way too easy. The difficulty of securing kills and getting out as Venture compared to Sombra is insane. They are much easier to play, and I suggest you pick up Venture if you haven't already. I see Ventures get clowned a bit, but the thing is, the DPS category is so weak. If you just learn how to contribute somewhat and maximize from your role without dying, then you're going to do a lot as damage, and you can carry just by being in with your team and not making a mistake. And Venture's pretty good at that. Alternatively, sniping is good again because Sombra is weak. Widowmaker is going to be higher on the list. So if you've got the aim, Widow can take over the game. And playing keep away and taking surprise angles, Widow can dominate through the ranked ladder because, well, your damage don't do that much. Damage is the weakest role by far. And because of that, again, playing in a surprise position, just getting a pick here or there can really add to help the team snowball. Because once you start to get an advantage in a speed-based meta, your team is going to run over the enemy team, right? They very quickly finish the fight when you have an advantage. So Widow, very, very good. Also, I'd say Sojourn with her buffs, very, very good. Any small kind of map where there's going to be a target on the tank, I'm thinking of Throne of Anubis, the nade is going to hard counter everything in Throne of Anubis. You just place it down, does tons of damage to everybody, you get rail up. Man, it's just nuts what Sojourn can do in a brawly type map. Very, very good. Also top tier DPS picks. We're going to put some hit scans here. There's a whole hit scan metagame going on, which one has the better range against the other, counter picking the tank. Do you want to boop? Do you want to disable? Especially since there's a lot of poke supports that are quite good, and poking against the top tier picks is great. Against Juno and Brig, having a poke advantage can help you win. Even though these are the top 2 support picks right now, you can outplay it with headshots and getting an off angle. So committing to poke in your backline with the DPS and supports can still be very good. We'll pop out some of the B tier here now for the good but not great tier. Echo, Hanzo, Bastion, Torbjorn, Symmetra. If you have a thing you want to counter on the enemy team, go for it. But I think these are just weaker, harder to play versions than the tier list characters above them, who I am going to put Junk, Pharah, and Mei up here at the top, maybe Mei down here as well, along with Genji. Okay, you guys can have a big family in the counter pickathon B tier. Damage just isn't that strong of a role, but a lot of them don't stand out as well, and it's the most skill dependent role. If you can execute with Mei, you can maybe put her higher. If you're counter picking with Genji, you can maybe put him higher. But I think the consistent damage of Junkrat and Pharah being quite easy to hit keeps them in A tier for me, even though there's hit scans and things that maybe counteract them. It's just you have some options to work down some of the characters that are really good right now as well. If you think about it, you're going against Brig, going against Reinhardt, Ram. A lot of these picks don't want to fight against these projectiles. And part of the reason they stay rather high in my last few tier lists is because of those armor changes that really benefits projectiles. They can work down the tank. And as well, they have a bunch of duels they can meaningfully help also. So that's the entire tier list, guys. Season 13. What are you guys thinking? Are you happy with where the game's at right now? It feels pretty balanced. So when I look at it, I think the devs are really just trying to give the player base the balance patch that we ask for. We don't really want characters like Lifeweaver dominating or Ballhog or Risa. So I think the devs are fine with putting some of these in the gutter tier. The whole Sombra experiment was interesting. I'm sure they're going to buff her somewhat, but I think it'll put her like here rather than like skyrocketing her to the top. They'll probably shave off a few seconds or so on one of the cooldowns in order to try to make her a little bit more relevant, but I think she's Garbo tier right now, like useless, why even waste your time kinds of gameplay. So that's it for the tier list. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.